All right, so today we're diving into some pretty choppy waters in German politics with this AfD party Congress.
Yeah, things are certainly heating up over there.
You could say that again, protest political maneuvering.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to unpack, especially for you listening out there. I know you're keeping a close eye on these global political trends, so this is right up your alley.
Definitely a lot of international attention on this one.
For sure. So we've got two main sources for this deep dive.
Mm.
First, we've got this Reddit thread that's absolutely exploding with opinions and reactions. It's fascinating to see what the public's saying.
It gives you that real, raw, unfiltered perspective.
Exactly. And then on the more factual side, we've got this Politico article laying out the events and the key players. So let's start with the basics. What exactly went down at this AfD Congress?
Well, this Congress was really a pivotal moment for the AfD as they prepare for the federal elections.
AfD, just for anyone who needs a refresher.
Alternative for Germany.
Got it.
And they used this Congress to do two main things. They nominated Alice Weidel as their candidate for Chancellor, and they finalized their campaign manifesto.
And that seems to be where a lot of the controversy is coming from, right?
Definitely stirring the pot with that one.
So what are some of the key points in their manifesto? What are they pushing for?
Well, they're advocating for some pretty significant changes like tougher immigration policies, things like stricter border controls, stricter limits on asylum seekers. And one of the most controversial points is they want Germany to leave the euro.
Whoa, okay. That's a big one.
Mhm.
I can only imagine what the economists are thinking about that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we've got to talk about the Elon Musk factor. His endorsement of Weidel definitely threw some gasoline on the fire.
Yeah, Musk's backing definitely put them in the spotlight.
Even though his reasoning was a little
Well, questionable for some.
yeah, to say the least. His whole thing about the AfD being the only way to save Germany, I don't know about that one.
It raised a few eyebrows, that's for sure.
So they've got their controversial candidate, their controversial manifesto.
Yeah.
But realistically, do you think Weidel actually has a shot at becoming chancellor?
Honestly, it's highly unlikely based on the current political landscape.
What makes you say that?
Well, the Politico article points to Friedrich Merz and the Christian Democratic Union, or CDU, as the front runners to succeed Schulz. And they, along with every other major party, have completely ruled out working with the AfD.
So no grand coalition with the AfD in the cards?
Not a chance.
But they're still polling at 20%, right? I mean, that's not insignificant.
It's definitely a significant number.
Yeah.
And it's causing a lot of concern, especially given those comparisons to, the Nazi Party's rise.
Yeah, those parallels are definitely hard to ignore. And the Reddit thread is just full of people drawing those connections. Some are even calling AfD members the new Nazis.
It's understandable why those comparisons are being made. I mean,
I can see why.
the AfD stance on immigration, their rhetoric, it has some people hearing echoes of the past.
It's especially that nationalistic kind of...
Yeah, that nationalistic, xenophobic language.
Yeah, which is all too familiar from Germany's history. And it's not just online chatter. We're seeing real-world action, too. Thousands of protesters blocking access to the Congress, chanting, "No to Nazis."
Yeah, the Reddit thread really gives you a sense of the intensity of the emotions surrounding this event.
Oh, absolutely. Like, people are angry, they're scared, they're determined to do something about it.
Definitely.
It's a whole mix of emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's leading to a lot of debate about how to deal with the AfD.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from calls for boycotts and bans to some
pretty out there suggestions.
to put it mildly.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a sense of urgency in a lot of these comments. Like the AfD's rise needs to be stopped and quickly.
People are worried not just about the AfD itself, but about what their growing popularity says about German society and the potential for,
History to repeat itself.
Exactly. That's the underlying fear for a lot of people.
So how much of a threat do you think the AfD actually poses?
I mean, are they a legitimate political force with some extreme viewpoints, or are they something more insidious? What are people saying in that Reddit thread?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's a real mix of perspectives on that.
Like, what are some of the prevailing viewpoints?
Well, some experts believe that the AfD is really capitalizing on existing anxieties, particularly around immigration and economic uncertainty.
They're kind of like offering simple solutions to complex problems.
Exactly. And those simple solutions, even if they're divisive, can be appealing to people who feel like they're not being heard by the mainstream political system.
So they're tapping into this pre-existing pool of discontent.
Exactly. But there's another side to this, too. The Reddit thread also highlights the fear that the AfD is actively trying to undermine democratic norms and institutions.
So it's not just that they have extreme viewpoints, but that they're actually trying to dismantle the system from within?
That's the worry for a lot of people. And some even see parallels to how the Nazi Party operated during the Weimar Republic.
Oh, wow. Slowly gaining influence, eroding trust in democratic processes, and exploiting those societal divisions for their own gain. That's pretty chilling stuff. So how is Germany dealing with all of this? Is there a way to effectively counter the AfD's influence?
Well, that's where things get really tricky. You've got a strong public backlash, protests in the streets, calls for legal action against the party.
What kind of legal action are we talking about?
Some are even talking about banning them altogether.
A total ban. That seems like a pretty extreme step, especially in a democracy.
It would be a very controversial move for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, banning a political party raises serious concerns about freedom of speech and political expression.
Yeah, that's a slippery slope.
Plus, it could backfire, make the AfD even more appealing as a symbol of resistance against the establishment.
I see. So it's not as simple as just shutting them down.
Not at all. It's
Yeah.
a very delicate situation.
What other options are being discussed?
Well, the Reddit thread is like a melting pot of opinions on how to handle the AfD counter-protests, legal action, ostracizing party members from society. You name it, it's in there.
It really highlights this fundamental dilemma of how to deal with extremist ideologies in a democratic society.
It's a question that democracies around the world are grappling with.
Yeah.
Huh.
How do you balance free speech with the needs to protect against hate speech and violence? It's a tough one.
It's an ongoing balancing act for sure. And the historical and cultural context plays a huge role.
Well, I think it's safe to say that this AfD Congress is just the tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely.
But before we get into what all of this means for the future of German politics, I want to take a step back and look at some of the key takeaways from these sources. What are some of the things that really stood out to you?
Well, one thing that jumps out is how the AfD is really exploiting these weaknesses in the German political system. They're tapping into these anxieties and frustrations that people already have with the mainstream parties.
Yeah, so even if they can't form a government themselves, they can still exert a lot of influence just by being there, just by being present in the political landscape.
Exactly. And Germany's political system, while it's designed to be inclusive, is also pretty complex.
Oh, for sure.
You've got this proportional representation system and all these requirements for building coalitions. It makes it really hard for any single party to gain complete control.
Yeah, the Reddit thread was talking about that.
Yeah.
Some people were comparing it to putting together a giant puzzle, like trying to form a government in Germany.
Especially with the AfD in the mix, because none of the major parties want to work with them.
Right. It's like this high-stakes game of political chess.
Exactly. Everyone's trying to figure out their next move and how to keep the AfD in check.
But even if they can't officially join the government, they still have a platform in parliament.
Right. They can still push their agenda from there.
So they're kind of acting as this disruptor, injecting their ideology into the mainstream even without actually holding the reins of power.
Absolutely. And that's what a lot of those Reddit users are worried about.
What do you mean?
They're concerned about the AfD normalizing their rhetoric and influencing the political discourse.
So it's like their talking points, their framing of issues.
Yeah.
It all starts to seep into the mainstream.
Exactly. And it starts to affect how other parties react and how the public perceives these issues.
Which brings us back to those historical parallels, the way the Nazi Party gradually gained influence and made their extreme views seem more acceptable.
Right. Until they were in a position to seize power.
And it's like, that's what's happening here.
It's a disturbing echo of the past. And the AfD's strategy seems to be playing on some of those same tactics, chipping away at democratic norms, sowing distrust in institutions, exploiting those societal divisions we talked about.
And it's a strategy that seems to be working to some extent. I mean, they've gone from this fringe movement to the second largest party in just a few years.
Yeah. It's pretty remarkable.
What lessons do you think we can learn from this?
I think it's a wake-up call for democracies everywhere. It shows how these seemingly fringe movements can gain traction by tapping into populist sentiment and exploiting those anxieties we were talking about earlier.
It's like a reminder that we can't be complacent about the health of our democracies.
Absolutely.
So what's the antidote? How can Germany, or any other democracy for that matter, prevent this kind of slow erosion of democratic values?
Right.
The Reddit thread had some pretty intense ideas, but what about from an expert perspective? What are some of the solutions here?
It's a multifaceted challenge. It requires a comprehensive response.
Okay.
First and foremost, we need to strengthen our democratic institutions.
What do you mean by that?
Making sure that elections are fair and transparent, that the media is free and independent, and that the rule of law is upheld.
Those are like the basics, right?
the cornerstones of a healthy democracy.
Things we often take for granted.
Exactly. But it also requires tackling those underlying societal issues that are fueling these extremist ideologies.
Like what kind of issues?
Things like economic inequality, social alienation, feelings of cultural displacement. All of those things can create resentment and anger that extremist groups can exploit.
So it's not just about fighting extremism on the surface, but about creating a more inclusive and equitable society.
Precisely. A society where people feel like they have a stake in the system and aren't as susceptible to that extremist rhetoric.
A society that's more resilient to these kinds of threats.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the public reaction to the AfD Congress. It's clear that people are worried about the direction Germany is heading in, and they're actively searching for ways to resist the AfD's influence.
Yeah, the Reddit thread was a testament to that.
A mix of fear, anger, determination.
Even a bit of despair I saw in some of those comments.
Yeah, people are grappling with how to respond. Direct confrontation, legal action, even more subtle forms of resistance. It reflects this wider debate happening across Germany, a society wrestling with how to protect its democratic values against this rising tide.
And like we discussed, this debate has implications far beyond Germany. It's a struggle that's playing out in democracies all over the world.
Each facing its own unique context and challenges.
So what's happening in Germany is really a microcosm of a much larger global trend.
It's a reminder that the fight for democracy is ongoing. It demands constant vigilance, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage in these difficult conversations.
Yeah, it's not just about casting a vote every few years, but about actively participating in shaping the society we want to live in.
And recognizing that solutions to these complex problems aren't simple or easy. We need to resist the allure of those quick fixes that often lead down a path of division and discord.
You mentioned legal action earlier. This idea of banning the AfD keeps popping up. Is that even a realistic possibility in Germany?
It's a highly contentious issue. Germany has very strict laws against hate speech and inciting violence stemming from its history with Nazism.
Right. Those laws are there to prevent the resurgence of those dangerous ideologies.
Yeah.
But banning a political party seems like a huge step even with that history.
It would be a major decision with significant implications for freedom of speech and political expression.
I can see that.
There is a very fine line between protecting against real threats and suppressing legitimate political dissent. And the legal bar for banning a party in Germany is incredibly high.
Like, what do you have to prove?
It's not just about disagreeing with their views. You have to prove they pose a clear and present danger to democracy.
So it's not as easy as some of those Reddit users might think.
Not at all. And that's where the AfD strategy gets even more complicated.
How so?
They often use coded language and dog whistles that kind of skirt the edges of legality.
So even if their rhetoric is divisive and inflammatory, it's hard to pin them down with concrete evidence of wrongdoing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which makes determining the appropriate response that much more challenging.
It's like they're playing this very calculated game.
They know how to push the boundaries without crossing the line.
So it's a tense situation. A party with these extreme views is gaining traction, but they haven't explicitly broken the law enough to warrant a ban. It's like a political pressure cooker.
That's a great analogy. And it's this pressure cooker dynamic that makes the situation in Germany so fascinating and potentially volatile.
Okay. I'm ready for the final part of this deep dive.
Yeah.
Let's bring it all together. So we're in this pressure cooker, right? The AfD is gaining momentum. The public is reacting. And we're trying to figure out how to handle all of this within the framework of a democracy. Where do we go from here? What's the big picture?
Well, I think the AfD's rise is a stark reminder that we can't take our democracies for granted. We can't just assume everything's going to be fine. We have to actively protect them.
That's like a wake-up call.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a canary in a coal mine. It's alarming that a party with these views is gaining ground in a country like Germany with its history, you know?
Especially Germany.
Yeah.
With their commitment to democratic values. It's like, whoa, hold on a second.
Yeah, it makes you stop and think. It really drives home the point that the lessons of the past aren't always learned. And these forces of intolerance and division, they can come back in ways you might not expect.
Yeah, and it's not enough to just ignore them or pretend they don't exist.
Right. We can't just dismiss people who hold views we find abhorrent. We need to understand where those views are coming from. What are the fears and anxieties that are driving them?
What are they tapping into?
Exactly. And how can we address the root causes? Otherwise, we're just going to see more polarization and more erosion of those democratic values.
Yeah, it's about having those tough conversations, even if they're uncomfortable. Even if it's with people we disagree with fundamentally.
That's part of what makes a democracy strong, the ability to have those conversations and to disagree respectfully.
Well, this deep dive has been really eye-opening for me, I've got to say. It's given me a whole new perspective on German politics and the challenges facing democracies all over the world.
It's a reminder that democracy is a work in progress. It's a constant effort to find that balance between individual freedoms and the common good.
Yeah, and we have to be vigilant against those who would exploit our differences for their own gain. So it's a call to action, in a way. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in protecting these democratic values.
By staying informed, by engaging in those crucial conversations, and by holding our leaders accountable.
Well said. Well said. I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. You've really helped shed light on this complex and kind of unsettling situation.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. The AfD Congress might be over, but the discussion about the future of German politics and the future of democracy itself, that's far from over.
So to you listening out there, we leave you with this. Given what we've learned about the AfD and those historical parallels, how do you think democracy should balance free speech with the potential rise of extremist ideologies? What lessons can we take from Germany's experience and apply to our own societies? Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.
The future of democracy depends on it.
And that concludes our deep dive into the AfD Party Congress. We'll see you next time for another insightful journey into the world of ideas.